Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on Keep Running with BK, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my specific training plans for a half marathon attempt later on this fall. So stay tuned and we'll be right back with more details right after this. Thanks again everyone for checking out the channel here on Keep Running with BK, and if you've been following along, I am targeting a hard half marathon effort either in a race or a personal time trial later this fall at the end of October, and that will be after an 8-week training block, the details of which I'm going to get into a little bit more today. But I'm transitioning away from 100% maffetone or easy running from this summer as things are beginning to cool off a little bit, and I want to do some speed work and put myself to the test and see if I can't improve upon my half marathon time trial that I did this past spring back in April, when I averaged around a 7:51 pace for that, and this fall I'm targeting a 7:30 pace, which I believe translates to a 1:38:30 half marathon. So I'm gonna share with you today in the video kind of what my rough training plan is for that. I'll break down some of the speed work that I'm gonna be doing and how I will approach my long runs, and share that with you. And as we're going through this, if you find value in it, why don't you go ahead and click the like button. That will help out the channel, raise awareness to the channel, as well as kind of help promote the video. And as you listen along, if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts or comments or things that you've tried in your own half marathon training that you want to share with myself and others, feel free to share that down below in the comments. And as always, I just appreciate the participation. I'm always interested in learning from other runners as well as sharing my own thoughts with you. Really just hoping to encourage and motivate all of us to continue to learn, continue to improve, and to keep running. And so let's get into the details. So I'm allowing 8 weeks to do an 80-20 approach, where 80% of my running will continue to be low heart rate, easy running, really to promote really full recovery, so that when I do the hard efforts in the middle of the week or as part of my long run, that I'm fully recovered, fully refreshed, but yet maintaining that aerobic base that I've worked so hard to continue to improve upon. So roughly 20% of my training each week will be dedicated to harder efforts. I plan on running roughly 35 miles a week on average. I suspect as I get into the later weeks of this 8-week training block that will work its way up a little bit, maybe more towards a 40-mile week. So 20% of that roughly translates to 7 to 8 miles a week of hard training. The remaining effort will be, as I mentioned, all easy running. So the way I started this off is, as I shared in my video last week, I did a hard effort the first part of last week just to really get a gauge of where my current fitness level was in trying to run hard. And from that hard effort, I took what my mile split was and I ran a 6:15 mile, which I then looked up in Daniel's Running Formula, a book that I have long been a fan of. I've used it quite a bit over the past couple of decades, and I shared with you in my last video that Jack Daniels and his team have done a bunch of research, and they have taken like race results and performances from various runners of all different fitness levels and developed these aerobic profiles, and based on that they've been able to give you expected race performances based on their research as well as target pace-based training efforts for various types of training over various distances, and I shared a little bit more details around that. And I have found that data-based research extremely helpful in helping me determine what is the proper pace for the type of training I'm doing based on my current fitness level and my current tolerance for discomfort. These VDOT aerobic profiles that Jack Daniels provides in his book really accommodates, again, like performances, which takes into consideration fitness level as well as one's tolerance for discomfort, meaning that someone who is willing to push themselves harder, who has a race result of X, and someone who doesn't have a tolerance for discomfort, who also has a race performance of X, they get the same race projections as well as the same target paces for their training to accommodate both in the same way, which I think is kind of a really ingenious and smart and appropriate way to accommodate all sorts of runners. And so I did that test last week. I got a VDOT score or profile of 46 based on that hard effort, and I will be using that over the duration of my 8-week training block to train at those target paces when doing my speed work. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share on the screen as I talk about this some of the speed work efforts that I plan over the 8 weeks, and I'm going to start with the week or the runs that I'm going to do in the middle of the week. So essentially I've broken this down. I'm splitting up my speed work into 2 segments. I'm going to do one workout in the middle of the week, and then I'm going to incorporate some harder efforts as part of my long run each week, just to help break that up, and that I think simulates more of the target race that I'm training for, which is a half marathon. And so I'll share those details with you. So starting with the midweek runs, I'm going to really leave week 1 and week 8 out of this, since week 1 really was running that hard effort to determine what my VDOT score was. And then that week 8 really I'm going to use as part of a taper, if you will, where I'm not going to do really any hard efforts the week of the targeted half marathon, just to give myself a little bit more rest and recovery to go into that with fresh legs. So that leaves 6 weeks, and I am going to dedicate 2 weeks to doing repeat efforts, 2 weeks to intervals, and 2 weeks to tempo runs as my primary focus in the middle of the week. Repeats are going to be shorter in distance but harder. Intervals will be slightly longer and comfortably hard, and then the tempos I will do even longer and slightly slower, more at say a hard 10K effort. So this week I started with 3 200s with full recoveries, followed by 6 400s with full recoveries, followed by 3 200s with full recoveries, and I did a warm-up and a cool down to bookend that particular workout. Now, typically when I do this, I have a stopwatch or a watch that actually has a repeat countdown timer, and so I set it for what I hope to run for a 200, so that in my 200s, when I get done with that, I can gauge, was that too fast, was that too slow, or when I'm doing the 400s, that alarm is going off halfway through, so I'm gauging am I halfway around the track at that target pace, and I can make micro adjustments over the course of that. And that's kind of how over the years when I've done this type of workout, I've used a stopwatch with that countdown timer to really help me gauge the appropriate pace. The challenge I had this time around is the battery on my stopwatch with that function has died, and I did not have really an available replacement, and I didn't realize that until the night before. So not really a whole lot of time to really seek out a replacement. The other challenge I had is I was doing this at 5:30 in the morning when it's still dark out, and there's not very good lighting, so I really couldn't look down at my watch, my GPS Garmin, to really use that as a functional method to monitor this. So I had to go really based on gut feel. And long story short, after I looked at the actual results to see how I did, I actually ran a little bit slower than the target pace. I was about 8 seconds per 200 slower and about 15 seconds on average per 400 slower than where the VDOT score dictated. And I'm going into a lot of details around this just to kind of be real and to kind of share with you how I manage this during an actual workout. And as I was thinking about this, I kind of went into it knowing I was going to have to go by feel, but I also went in there probably a little bit more conservative than I wanted to, because my tendency, I thought, would be to want to go out really hard and basically go out too hard too early and then really compromise the quality of those repeats. The good news is all those repeats were quality. I felt good about keeping a consistent hard effort through all of them. It was just a little conservative, a little short, and I can adjust for that this coming week, and that's how I'm planning on approaching that effort. So I'm going to repeat that same workout next week, in week 3 of my 8-week training plan. And then for weeks 4 and 5, I'm going to switch to intervals, and there is a slightly gentle rolling hill. It's not that's probably too strong of a description, but I have a 1 kilometer loop in one of the common routes that I run during the week that I typically do my kilometer type based speed work on. So it's not necessarily flat, but it's got a gentle downhill stretch, and it's got a gentle uphill stretch, and it works for my needs, and I don't mind a little bit of variation there. It kind of simulates what it might be on a race type course, but generally speaking, when I do speed work like this, I generally like a relatively flat, so I can have a consistent pace and I can really keep the effort consistent. So something to keep in mind when you do these. So basically, I'm going to be doing 5 1 kilometer repeats or intervals with about a 1 to 2 minute recovery in between each, and I will bookend that workout by basically roughly a little over a mile easy run. And so that's kind of the plan for those weeks. And then for weeks 6 and 7, I'm going to do some tempo work. I'll probably do that on just one of my normal routes, or I might go down to the bike trail where I can maybe look down at the road or on the trail where they have each half mile marked off, and I can kind of gauge how I'm doing. But I will be running in week 6. I'm going to do three different miles at tempo pace. Based on my VDOT score, my tempo pace is a 7:17 mile, so that's what I will be shooting for. Then in week 7, I'm going to add an additional mile to that. So the first week, in week 6, I'll do 3 1-mile tempo runs or intervals there, and then in week 7, I'll do 4 miles at 7:17 pace with a brief recovery. So it's a little bit more than the week before, but I'll probably be bumping my weekly mileage up as well, as I also stretch out my long runs as I get down to that stretch as well. So then in the week 8, as I mentioned, I'm not going to really do any structured repeats, intervals, or tempo runs, but I will probably do 8 to 10 strides in the middle of my run, similar to what I did over the summer when I was doing strictly easy running, Maffetone based running. So now I'd like to talk about how I'm going to structure my long runs. This should be pretty straightforward, as it's going to be very similar each week with one minor adjustment. So I will probably start each of my long runs and finish each of my long runs with an easy effort based on kind of my MAF targeted heart rate will be the goal. So I'll keep it under 136 beats per minute, and I hope to get down to and under 136 beats per minute for those last few miles, each of my long runs during this training block. But after I probably warm up with 3 easy MAF miles, then I'm going to do 2 miles slightly faster. So when I use a VDOT score of 46, Daniel's running formula suggests a certain long run pace, which I'm not going to follow for my long runs. I'm going to stick, with the Maffetone because it's slightly slower and easier, and I want to really use that to warm up, loosen me up, because it served me very well. But then I'm going to run 2 miles at that long suggested training rate. Then I'm going to target a progressively longer amount of miles at the suggested marathon pace. And that suggested marathon pace, I believe, is a 7:48 mile. And so I did 2 miles at that this past week in week 1. For week 2, I'm going to be doing 3 miles at that pace. Then for weeks 3 and 4, I'm going to do 4 miles, followed by 5 miles, 6 miles, and then during my taper, I'm going to cut that back to 3 miles, and then it'll be half marathon day. So I'm not getting crazy with the number of miles that I'm doing at this, but I want to progressively increase the duration or the number of miles that I will run at this 7:48 target pace in preparation of running that 7:30 pace for the whole duration of a half marathon. After that progressive number of miles at marathon pace, I will then regress back to 2 miles at the suggested long run pace, followed by probably 2 to 3 or whatever the remaining amount of distance is at my targeted MAF heart rate, just to de-stress the body, bring the heart rate down gradually, and finish off my mileage with that. So there you have it. That's an 8-week training plan where I'm going to try some pace-based hard speed efforts in the middle of the week, as well as some targeted suggested marathon pace miles in the middle of my long runs. This is a little bit different than perhaps how I would have done a marathon training plan or how I've used these pace-driven things in the past, but I really like the approach given the abbreviated training schedule of only 8 weeks, or this training block only being 8 weeks versus say a 12 to 16 week marathon training plan or half marathon training plan that I may have done in the past. So as promised, some details there. What are your thoughts? If you have anything, I'd love to hear about it below. Or if you have something that you do differently, I'd love to hear what you're doing. I hope that you will check back, as I will share more with you how this training goes next week. And until then, stay safe, train smart, and keep running.